Yeah, I think there should have been more discussion than a debate, really. But before I even start, let me tell you a little story. I went to my materials guy at the hospital because we wanted to bring in a new system, an atherectomy system, of course. And he said to me, no, we can't do this, and we need some value-added analysis, and we need to look at how many we need to keep in stock. And finally, after a little bit of debate, he said, I'll tell you what, why don't I just get you everything that you have at the OBL, thinking that I would have less at the OBL. I said, absolutely, that would be a no-brainer. If you can get me at the hospital, the materials we have at the OBL, that would be fabulous. We'd be able to proceed, in a friendly way. So right off, in terms of the question of does the site of service affect our therapy of choice? Yeah, the hospital is an adverse place to perform procedures because I can't get the tools that I need to perform my procedures. Anyway, I think this is complimentary. Eric's already kind of pointed to this. There is a growth in the utilization of outpatient laboratories, whether it be OBL or ambulatory surgery center. You can see a 7.5% year-over-year growth rate from 2023, anticipated right through 2030. It's a fact at this point that we will be, many of us, practicing in this environment. And this is also reflected over here in sort of Medicare reimbursements. Nobody does Medicare analyses better than Erica. We can't even, kind of hold a candle to what he's able to do. But, clearly this is where we're going. And here you see the volume of the place of service growing dramatically, 305.7% between 2011 and 2017. So it's here. So I'm actually going to address a lot of things that you addressed. So again, it's complementary. But I really think we need to understand that a lot of what we do in the OBL is based on poor U.S. healthcare policies. I mean, we have decreased reimbursement over 15% over 5 years in a site of service where we're cost effective compared to hospital care, and yet we keep on having our reimbursement driven down. And it's funny, I wear two hats. I'm a physician and I care about my patients deeply and I want to provide good care, but we need to be able to keep the lights on and maintain our staff to provide that necessary care. And while this is favorable to third-party payers and CMS, they continue to cut our reimbursement. So I don't want to sound like Donald Trump, who says, the fact that I didn't pay taxes means I'm smart, because there's a loophole for that. But the truth is, we talk about whether or not it's appropriate to use things, and I know we should be held to a higher bar as physicians than perhaps lawyers, for example. But, the truth of the fact, is that maybe there is more utilization of atherectomy, but we didn't create the problem. We didn't start the fire. We're responding to the environmental needs so that we can overall provide good care with the belief, as Eric already showed, that we're not harming our patients in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, there's quite a bit of data that shows that atherectomy does potentially improve outcomes in these patients in terms of amputation-free prevention, amputation-free survival. I'm not going to address the impact of physician ownership on ethical practices. We know there are a lot of, outliers. There's always, a couple of bad apples in every cart. And I don't really know how to address that. I do agree wholeheartedly we should need to find a way to police ourselves better so that we get people doing appropriate procedures. My concern is that because there is a financial incentive to do things in the OBL and ASC, that doctors are doing things they just shouldn't be doing, whether they're completely unnecessary procedures, which we see a lot of, repeat or stage procedures, overuse of atherectomy. On the other side, we want to not use effective therapies like DCBs because we're in the OBL and we're worried about the financial concerns. All this needs to be corrected. That's more of a poor U.S. healthcare policy. Non-physician stakeholders driving inappropriate incentives. There's been a lot recently, ProPublica and other things. I actually was in an OBL network, which I left voluntarily about 10 years ago because I was getting emails from a physician who owned this saying, we need to do more atherectomy so we increase our reimbursement. And I left. I mean, and the truth is, despite what people may say about, where you work or what specialty you have or what title you have, people are going to be ethical or unethical. Given a certain title, given a certain background, given a certain training, given a certain side of service, doesn't make you a better or a worse person. And of course, tied in with this is this complicity and conflict of interest we all have with industry financial concerns. All right, I wasn't going to address those things. Anyway, we do know, and it's widely believed, and Eric did the heavy lifting for me here, that, generally speaking, patient satisfaction is extraordinarily high in these services. I mean, I've had patients who I've treated in both settings, and I say, when they come back, let's say for the other leg, or they need additional work, where would you rather go? To a person, unless they live down the street from the hospital, they'd rather go to the OBL. This is a dedicated staff. We're doing dedicated work. They're not diluted by the vast majority of other things that are being done or that come up emergently throughout the course of the day. We're on time almost always, and I think overall it's much preferred. As you already saw, it's generally believed this increased access to minorities. We've talked a lot about disparities in healthcare in this country. It's just a travesty. Everybody should be able to get the same healthcare regardless of, where they come from, what their race might be, what their beliefs might be. But, that's not necessarily the case. Hospitals are, most, rigidly run businesses in America. They're really looking at the bottom line in every single possible way, and they just don't accept patients who are not going to reimburse them well. And we have the flexibility in the OBLs to allow these patients in. Schedules I talked about, more reliable, much, much better place to work. You go work at a hospital, I don't have to tell you guys, it is chaotic. I say at the hospital all day long, I'm doing something else. I'm never going to do the thing I was on my way to do without 5 or 6 or 10 interruptions. Whereas in the OBL, clearly, there's a much better work environment. We talked about the staff being better, and as I said up front, we can get supplies and inventory much better. Actually, at Viva a couple of years ago, I had a beta session, and I made this comment that it's so much easier to sort of operate in the OBL environment. And somebody picked it up in the audience and wrote something about it, went on the internet. I got called into my CEO's office at the hospital saying, how can you say that, that it's so much easier to get things done in the OBL that makes us look bad? I said, but it is. It just is. You make everything very, very challenging. It's 10 committees and 20 meetings to bring in an atherectomy system. Anyway, let's look at some of the data regarding this. So this is that Roger article. I think it's already been shown to you, so I don't have to spend much time on it, but you can see OBL-treated patients with this really address this disparities in healthcare issue. More often Black, more often a dual Medicare and Medicaid, lower resourced regions. They did get more atherectomy, but overall had a lower adjusted risk of major amputation or death compared with hospital-treated patients. So true, there was more atherectomy. I happen to believe in atherectomy in many of these patients that we're treating, particularly in the tibial circulation population, but it does not harm them. I actually think it's actually beneficial. And these favorable outcomes were consistent across all the subgroups and persisted even after you stratified by critical limb ischemia, as well as race and insurance status. As far as affecting where I do things, do I make a decision based upon the complexity of the patients where I'm going to work? Not at all. Not at all. We do extraordinarily complex work in the OBL, and I know many of the physicians in this room do as well. This looks at complex procedures, distal retrograde access for infrainguinal. So this is, pedal access stuff, working in the OBL, very safe, single center, study. More costly, more time consuming, same rate of complications as the hospital. And here you sort of see some of this data, whether it's hospital outpatient, which is top left here, ASC, OBL, one artery treated. Actually, in the hospital, you're more likely to treat one artery. More complex interventions are done in the ASC and the OBL, as you can sort of see as you go through this number. So in general, we're not shying away from difficult things in the outpatient setting at all. We're doing more of the difficult things in the outpatient setting. You can see at the distribution of patients here. All right, some more patient tissue pain and rest loss, tissue loss and rest pain. Some of that's also tied to the fact that we want to do wound care, which we don't necessarily do in the outpatient setting. Moderate and severe calcification, tibioperoneal lesions. Again, more of this was being done in the outpatient setting to a large degree than being done in the hospital. So certainly this data supports my personal practice that we do complex procedures and the site of service doesn't affect what we do. And yet, overall, despite the more atherectomies in the OBL and more specialty balloons in the hospital outpatient, if you go through all these lists of complications, there's essentially no differences. The perforation, obviously, which is sort of a stochastic sort of event, as you notice over here, was the only difference. This is looking at deep venous arterialization. It's our own paper. Can't get a more complex procedure than that. We're doing these in the OBL. We're doing them in the hospital or the OBL, wherever the patients, might have to be. But again, we will do these very challenging, patients. This is our initial study from 23 deep venous arterializations that we did in the OBL. Obviously, these are all patients who had no option and complex comorbidities and high Rutherford status, higher percentage of heel wounds that you want. Despite that, these patients have done very well. We're using off-the-shelf devices, which is relevant to the next slide. So the patency was not what we want, but overall wound healing out to 12 months, as you see here, 78%, very comparable to what was seen in the PROMISE data. And there's obviously an interesting mechanism of interest. Can we do it from a cost perspective? Yeah. I mean, you have to be careful. You have to be judicious in who you do this. We like to do distal DVAs, so we keep it to a single stent graft. We like to do that for other clinical reasons as well. And For what it's worth, all these patients get surveillance angiography and follow-up second-look angiography anyway for clinical reasons, which in the long run allows us to be a financial beneficial procedure. So what does limit us? In the long run, the biggest, limitations we have is that we have externally imposed limitations on what we can do and where we can do it by third parties and what they will pay, what devices they will pay for, resulting in selective utilization of these devices in different environments and overutilization of atherectomy in the OBL, perhaps. And this hospital inpatient list, which restricts such things as thrombectomy, simply needs to go away because that's really what's stopping us from doing what we want to do. Thank you.